You will give the people of Earth a review to look towards. The review will take forever to write. You'll lose patience with the subject matter. You will find it dull. But in time, the review will join you in the sun, Kora. In time, your panel of critics will record wonders.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Esco, and welcome to MediaWhorz. Today we'll be looking at Zach Snyder's interpretation of the Superman mythos, with his 2013 film, Man of Steel. So let's see if this movie soars to new heights or goes over like a lead balloon, as I throw this to the round table.
Okay, guys, I feel I should maybe put my cards on the table with this one. I don't really like Zach Snyder as a director. I don't hate him. But I've never been anything more than ambivalent when it came to his films. So, with that in mind, this film is exactly what I expected it to be. That is to say, I didn't really care for it. I don't like it, because I don't care. And I don't hate it, because I don't care.
Well, I like Zach Snyder, though I've kind of gotten the impression that in this group, I'm the only one that feels that way.
Well, I don't have a problem with him, but I feel that this movie was, on its own, mediocre. And as a Superman film, failed to outperform a movie from 30 years ago. And that's where my problems lie.
Here's where I stand. I don't particularly hate Snyder, but I do dislike several of his films.
Like I said, I don't hate him either. But he doesn't engage me on any emotional level. I view him as the epitome of a style over substance director. You know, some people will point to Michael Bay or Roland Emmerich as being style over substance, but in my opinion, they're more destruction over substance. Snyder, on the other hand, creates films that are gorgeous to look at, but have the emotional impact of a balled-up piece of tissue paper. And this is the guy DC got to launch their new film universe.
Oh, yeah. This film is filled with immaculate landscapes and images that will look great on your desktop.
Yeah, ironically, Man of Steel was supposed to be DC's Iron Man.
I know, it's embarrassing.
Now, I, like a lot of people, walked into this film simply hoping that it wouldn't be awful. Because if it was awful, that could once again stall Warner Brothers' plans to make a live-action Justice League movie. The thing is that, ultimately, it succeeded in not sucking, but didn't succeed in much more than that. There are a lot of flaws that are hard to overlook.
It's frustrating to think that this is supposed to be the cornerstone of the DC film universe, the DCFU, if you will. This film has one issue that, above all else, prevents it from being a good Superman film. It's not fun.
Yeah, the actors in this film are great and do an admirable job with the material that they're given, but even they can't really do much to infuse the movie with a sense of awe or enjoyment. I mean, there are a few exceptions, but they were by and large swallowed up by the rest of the film. One of the few characters that I did find interesting was the Army Colonel, played by Christopher Maloney.
Yeah, Elliot Saver was the biggest badass in this whole movie.
He had limited screen time, but he made the most of what he had.
Honestly, you could say the same about most of the cast. They largely get shuffled from scene to scene without really being given much time to breathe.
I know what you mean. Emil Hamilton shows up, but pretty much has no role to speak of. And I've heard a lot of people make the same complaint about Lois. I feel that there was more effort put into establishing the universe than actually making it an engaging film.
Personally, one of my problems with the film is that I found the scenes on Krypton to be bloated, tedious, and largely uninteresting. I found the early origin section to be tired, and Jor-El's overall plan seemed to have a massive number of inconsistencies and a lot of logistical hand-waving.
I guess I can relate to that a bit, but for me it wasn't really to any greater extent than the rest of the film. This actually kind of ties back to my earlier statement that the film just isn't fun. Not every film has to be fun, but Superman is supposed to be sort of a paragon who uplifts mankind, and to put it simply,
That's what this symbol means. The symbol of the House of El means hope. Embodied within that hope is the fundamental belief in the potential of every person to be a force for good.
The problem is, I never got a sense of hope or lightheartedness from any of the moments in this film, and in the end it just kind of felt dreary and tiring to me.
Hell, the one time they tried to infuse proceedings with a sense of lighthearted humor was at the very end, and it came right on the heels of what was intended to be a big dramatic moment. As a result, that scene felt about as tonally dissonant as Apocalypse Now with a laugh track.
Are you effing stupid?
It's one of your surveillance drones.
That's a $12 million piece of hardware.
It was.
Ironically, Jor-El did provide a small bit of levity to some of his scenes, but that was only when he wasn't trying to be prophetic and noble sounding. The irony might be that Kryptonians are all kind of morons in this film. Even setting aside the Kryptonian Council of Extras from 300, Zod and Jor-El both have a ton of moments where they just bat the idiot ball back and forth.
You know, the more I think about it, the more I kind of have to agree with Birdie's assessment that what Zach Snyder made here is really just a visually muted Dragon Ball Z movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. It doesn't have the lighthearted aspects of Dragon Ball, but as far as the action scenes go, I definitely see it.
Plus, Zod is essentially Vegeta in this movie.
It's over 9,000!
Alright, I gotta say this. Zod sought to destroy humanity. Still less of a dick than Vegeta.
Fine, he's Raditz. That being said, when looking back at Superman 2, there are definitely aspects of Zod's characterization that are borrowed from that film. The problem is that those slightly sillier elements end up conflicting with the almost robotic aspects of his character that this film presents.
You will bow down before me! I will find him!
I actually liked Michael Shannon's Zod. He had a certain complexity that served as an underlying element to his surprisingly black and white actions.
I exist only to protect Krypton. That is the sole purpose for which I was born. And every action I take, no matter how violent or how cruel, is for the greater good of my people.
I'll admit that I appreciate what they tried to do there, but it ends up conflicting with the less subtle aspects of his character. Hell, his sales pitch to try and get Clark to join his side was to show him stock footage from Terminator 2.
And if you join now, you get to enjoy Apocalypse and the death of everyone you love. Plus, my own special party mix.
Honestly, I think that my problem with the characters is that, by and large, they almost all come off as dicks. Hell, they even made Pa Kent a dick.
I'll be honest, I'm willing to defend this movie, but I don't think any of us came out of that film liking Jonathan Kent. No one likes this Pa Kent. I don't like him. The scene where Costner tells his son that maybe he should have let a bunch of children die kinda left a stain on the character. Even if I understand the intent, the approach was heavy-handed, and at a certain point, telling your preteen son to let his friends drown can come off as slightly dickish.
Are you effing stupid?
Yeah, Pa Kent is probably the worst offender in that regard, as the film doesn't actually give him anything to do besides be paranoid and callous. Though, as another movie recently reminded me...
Well, I don't know that I believe anyone's 100% a dick, man.
In all honesty, I think I could have forgiven the character if he wasn't so mind-bogglingly stupid. It's not much of a spoiler to say that Jonathan Kent dies. Many versions of the Superman origin have him die. It's usually used to nail home the lesson that even Clark can't stop death. The problem here is that, due to the circumstances of his death in this film, the moral ends up being that not even Clark can cure a terminal case of stupid! In fact, I would even go so far as to call that scene an onion of stupid, because trying to get through all those layers just starts to make my head spin.
You can't fix stupid.
Yeah, Jonathan Kent ends up going to save their dog who is locked in a car that is in the path of a tornado. He specifically tells Clark not to go, even though his son can move faster than the human eye can follow and instead goes himself.
Clark wouldn't even have to use his super speed to rescue the dog. The only reason Jonathan was delayed was because he got his leg stuck and twisted it. If Clark had gone and gotten the dog, it's not like anyone would have said, "Did you see how that Kent boy slid his leg free? That boy ain't human!"
And then, when the tornado catches him, they try and go for this quiet, poignant moment where Jonathan tells Clark to stay back. This is slightly undercut by the fact that Jonathan would have been a ragdoll by that point. Though, in all honesty, I would be interested in seeing Kevin Costner as Jonathan Kent in Oz.
Do you mean the magical world or the prison complex?
I'll get back to you on that.
As far as the action scenes go, I did enjoy the fight that occurred when the Kryptonians first encountered the army. It was appropriately brutal, with that sexy one turning soldiers into red mist left and right.
What is it with you and women that could break you in half?
His biggest criticism with The Dark Knight Rises was that Bane didn't have breasts.
It would be extremely painful.
I love it when you talk dirty.
The problem with her and the rest of the evil Kryptonians is that they had nothing interesting about them plot or character-wise beyond what the actors or actresses could bring. You remember the female Kryptonian, and you remember she's a good fighter, but nothing else. That's not a compelling character, that's an interesting mid-video game boss fight.
Which is why she gets taken out by a human.
Hey, Stabler had to do something. He was in danger of being pointless. Plus, she called him a pussy. That bitch had to go.
I think that my primary issues with this film come from both the aforementioned lack of levity and the lack of proper characterization, particularly with Superman. They don't write him as a human character. And this may just be personal preference, but I never like it when writers simply depict him as an unstoppable god. I prefer that they start with the human character and then simply add the power on top of that.
Yeah, Clark is only brought up as a character in the context of exploring Superman's backstory. He has no real identity beyond that.
There was one scene that I felt did provide some nice insight into his character, and that was the scene where he is discovering his ability to see through objects as a child. The scene worked well, and while it technically serves as a Chekhov's gun, it still served as a really nice moment between Clark and Martha.
One thing I particularly liked about the film was the style Snyder used to depict Krypton. I know that some of you didn't like the art style that he used for this film, but I thought that there were a lot of creative designs being implemented there.
Well, I think our complaints regarding the aesthetic are really focused towards one particular element, namely the color palette that he used.
Honestly, there was a lot of imagery that would have been spectacular if I weren't viewing it through a sepia-tone Snapchat filter.
Actually, speaking of Krypton, you gotta love how Zod's uprising was quelled. Apparently, all of the reinforcements were just hanging back until after Zod killed Jor-El.
Maybe they were stuck in a slow elevator?
Let's wrap this up. I like this movie. I feel that the actors did a great job, and I love the villains, in more ways than one. I can certainly understand some of the complaints that have been brought up, but I don't feel that those issues really hinder the film. Screw Papa Kent, though. I particularly enjoyed the style of the film, and personally, I'm a fan of Zach Snyder's work. For me, this is a legitimately good comic book movie, and I feel that this is an abductor friend. That's 8 out of 10.
This movie kinda depresses me. I like some of the characters like Lois and Martha Kent, and I like some of the action scenes, but every time I feel I can give this movie a point in its favor, the film always seems to mess up some other aspect, like dumb Pa Kent morals, poor handling of emotional moments, and the sheer joylessness of this film that is supposed to be about Superman. To hammer this home, we see Clark become a reporter at the Daily Planet at the end of the movie, despite having traded in a formal journalism education for hobo wisdom. The movie never cared about Clark Kent, and yet it expects us to at the end. That, in my mind, is a failure. I can't say that I'm pissed at it or that the film itself is actually bad per se. It's just incredibly disappointing and ultimately leaves me feeling rather drained. So for me, it is a meh 5 out of 10.
This movie was just okay. It's kind of irritating as a whole. I don't think it was wise to use Zod as the villain for the first movie. because it distracts from Clark's role as a human on Earth. I don't necessarily dislike how Superman dealt with Zod, but once again, I think it would have been better if we had been given a full film where they established Superman's character and moral code before maybe testing it in a sequel. And honestly, with the amount of damage to Metropolis and the loss of life that occurred in the climax, it would take decades to repair that.
It's gonna need a paint job and a shitload of screen doors.
As you can see, I still have a ton of gripes about this movie, but I'm going to give it a late night double feature. It's probably worth at least one viewing. 6 out of 10.
Look, I'm not much of a Superman fan. If I were to rank my top 10 DC heroes, he might make the top 10. That being said, I wanted to like this film. This is Warner Brothers' attempt to set up the Justice League universe, and as a fan of comics and cinema, I wanted to see this film succeed. But the movie gets dragged down by a joyless plot, awkward tonal shifts, and overly long action scenes. It doesn't fail, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that it succeeds either. Honestly, I don't think I'm likely to think of this movie again until someone else brings it up. So, I'm gonna give it a meh.
With 2 meh ratings, 1 late night double feature, and 1 abductor friend, the average MediaWhorz rating is late night double feature. So I, Jimmy V. Esco, ask that you, all of you, join us next time.
I feel like Superman, flying over muddy rivers, counting everything from 1 to 14, over roads where them sunflowers grow. I can see from here to eternity, and I'll see you around. I'm gone. I'll see you.
You start in journalism and go to Hobo Wisdom.